Terry Sanchez. I am part of the programming staff here, and on behalf of the Newport Beach Public Library, welcome to this evening's program featuring local author Anita Abriel. I want to start off by making sure I thank the Friends of the Library. It is because of their generous sponsorship that we're able to host these local author events. So thank you to the Friends, and if you haven't already, visit their bookstore. It's right across the lobby. It's open 7 days a week. It's completely volunteer run, and there is always a treasure to be found in there. So I also want to thank our bookseller, Creating Conversations, over here, who are here this evening selling books. If you didn't already buy your book beforehand, they will be here afterwards, and Anita will be here to sign your book as well. So thank you for being here, ladies. We're so excited and pleased to be hosting Anita Abriel this evening. Anita was born in Sydney, Australia. She received her BA in English Literature with a minor in creative writing from Bard College. She also attended UC Berkeley's Master's in Creative Writing program. Anita's written several popular novels under the name Anita Hughes. One of them, Rome in Love, was made into a Hallmark movie, which premiered last July. And tonight we are presenting her newest novel. It just came out last week, February 4th. It actually pre-released in Australia a few days before that and is a national bestseller in Australia right now. So congratulations, Anita. Her book, The Light After the War, it's an incredible true story. It's the story of two Jewish friends who survived the Holocaust and their journey in finding love and friendship in the aftermath of World War II. The story is inspired and based on her mother's own actual experiences. So we are super excited. As I said, it just released last week. We already have quite a long wait list for her book here at the library. So we're excited to be hosting Anita. Please join me in welcoming Anita Abriel.
Should have worn taller shoes, right? Okay, there we go. I won't get any awards for my height, but first of all, I want to thank Terry so much for having me and the Friends of the Library, and you guys can hear me, right? I live in Dana Point, and so any excuse to come up to this library, because you guys really do it right up here, and to actually be in the front of everybody is really fantastic. So I'm going to start by just reading a couple of paragraphs, because one thing I really try to do in my books is take you there. And it's been really very satisfying to me that when people finish reading this, they say, I felt like I was in Naples with these girls. I felt like I was in Venezuela. I have a funny but not funny story. Maybe I'll start with that. I live, down in Dana Point, and like you guys, we get these incredible sunsets. And one day while I was writing this, a friend said, let's go up to whatever and go see the sunset. And we go up and see the most beautiful sunset. And I go, oh my God, this is so nice, because I've spent all day in a cattle car on my way to Auschwitz. Because truly, when you write, or at least when I write, I feel like I'm right there. That's how I do it. And I truly, and that's why it's wonderful writing it, and it's difficult. And as I actually look at the next thing I'm writing, I'm like, wow, do I really have to go back to a concentration camp again? Because you really feel like you're right there in the struggles that they went through, and these incredibly inhumane conditions. That's what you feel. So I just thought I'd take you there for just 2 paragraphs. Chapter 1, Spring 1946. Vera Frankel had never seen the sun so bright or streets teeming with so many people. Lovers held hands, teenagers zoomed by on Vespas, and old women carried shopping bags laden with fruits and vegetables. Vera smelled sweat and cigarettes and gasoline. The experience of arriving in Naples from Hungary made Vera remember the early days in Budapest when she was 8 years old and recovering from diphtheria. The curtains in her room had been drawn back, and she was allowed to sit outside and eat a bowl of plain soup. Nothing had ever tasted so good, and the scent of flowers in the garden was more intoxicating than her mother's perfume. All around her, people felt the same way now. The outdoor cafes overflowed with customers enjoying espresso without fear of bombs exploding. They nodded at neighbors they had been too afraid to stop and talk to, and kissed boys returning from the front until their cheeks were raw. 11 months ago, the Allies had defeated the Nazis, and the war in Europe was over. So I grew up in Sydney, Australia, and my mother, was a Holocaust survivor, and it's very much based on her. And being a child, I was extremely self-centered, as we all are as children, and I would hear all these stories. And my mother spoke Hungarian, and she actually spoke 7 languages, but they were just part of your childhood, like peanut butter, and so you just didn't take it, you didn't think about it. And then when I was about 11 or 12, I heard one story that was so incredibly shocking that even at that age, I was like, I'm going to have to write this someday. And so today, as the book is published, friends of mine will call and say, is that part true? And I'll say, yeah, it's actually almost all true. So when you get to the one part that you go, I actually can't believe this, you can message me through my website and say, is that part true? And I will respond. So as I was saying, I grew up in Australia, and there were many Holocaust survivors there because so many couldn't get into America. And in our part of Sydney, people spoke Hungarian, they spoke Czech, they spoke Russian, they spoke German, and you'd go down the street and go to these cafes that were very much like Europe. And it didn't occur to me on the other side of Sydney, people were wearing their bowling whites, and they were extremely Australian, and they were having their sausage rolls and their Vegemite. But in our part, it was just very, 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 the war was still very raw. Nobody drove a German car. That was absolutely not allowed. And it was just very, very, still much part of the experience. And so as I got older and as I decided to become a writer, all of these stories just stayed in my head. And I had a best friend growing up, and she was adopted because her mother couldn't have children. Both her parents were Holocaust survivors, and her mother spent every day in a dark room. And again, it just didn't occur to me that this was not the way that life was supposed to be. And they had actually become very successful over there, her husband, but she was a concentration camp survivor. And so she just spent every day lying down in a dark room. And so this was just the way that people grew up. And like Terry said, I have written actually 14 novels under my name, Anita Hughes, and they've all been sort of light romance. And people have said to me, why did you decide to write this now? And so 2 reasons. One is my mother, who I absolutely adored, and who, if you see any of my books, including this one, all of my books are dedicated just to her. And I so wish that she was here, and yet I feel so honored that I got to write this about her. And I didn't change any of the names. All of the names here of her and her best friend and her parents and everything is the way it was. But people say, why did you write that now? And I said, well, 2 reasons. One, she died from Alzheimer's a few years ago, which, again, such an incredibly vital person and a wonderful writer, actually. It was very sad. And then my husband actually committed suicide 3 years ago. And I have 5 children. And it just made me think of 2 things. One, where do we get the will to survive? Where do we get the will to survive? Why do some people not have it as much as others? And where did these young people during this time get it, or where did all the Jewish people get it? And that leads me to a little joke, because Jews are very good at jokes. And somebody at one of my last talks said, why are the Jews so good at survival? And so I said, there's a story about a cruise ship, and there's a number of people standing on the deck of a cruise ship. And all of a sudden, this little boy falls overboard, and everyone's like, someone's got to go in and save them. And so this skinny little Jew jumps into the ocean and saves him. And after they come out and he rescues him, everyone says, oh my God, how could you do that? He says, they say, how could you jump? He says, what do you mean jump? I was pushed. And that's how we survive, because for 2,000 years, we have had to jump, because we've been pushed. The Holocaust, of course, was the most extreme example. And I think what is particularly interesting about Hungary, Budapest, which is where my mother grew up and where it's set, is it came so late into the war. 1944, the war was practically over, and 500,000 Hungarian Jews were killed. So within 1 year, 500,000 Jews were killed. And so that just seems absolutely crazy to me that so many. And so that's the other reason that I really wanted to write about it, because you hear so many different aspects of the war, and I didn't even know that. So the two things: one is the how one really, where do we get the will to survive? And then two, how do you build your life again after something like this has happened and everything that is familiar to you is taken away? I mean, these girls, my mother and her best friend Edith, they were still teenagers practically, and they had to move 3 different continents all alone. And how do you do that? I mean, my children are way older than that. We all have children, I'm guessing, that are, that or older. How can you even imagine them doing that? And the other thing that I really thought about in writing this is, as a writer, you learn things that you didn't know you were asking. And I actually, a lot of people always ask, how do you write? Because that's always a big question. And I actually have this thing, and if there's any writers out there, it really works, is I sit in the dark at night by myself, and I used to do it in my walk-in closet so that none of my children could follow me, because it was like at the end of the house. Now there's only one child left, so no one follows me. But I sit in the dark on the floor in the closet for about an hour, which I will probably do when I go home, and I think up everything I'm going to write the next day. And I do everything, details and dialogue, and when you do that and you shut out everything else, you start asking questions that you didn't know that you asked. And so in the book, there's a rabbi that Vera has a lot of conversations with, and during those conversations, I don't know if I learned the answers, but I learned the questions. And I think that's one thing that, I would love readers to take away, is maybe not the answers, but at least the questions that we should still be asking. How could this have happened? How can it never happen again? We are all humans, and we have evolved, and for this sort of hatred to be there, to want to wipe out an entire race, so many people, millions and millions of people, is unthinkable. And yet it happened to my, to my mother. So the other thing that I want people to take away, and truly what I learned, at least the question, is, what do I think is the most important value that people can have? And I believe, after writing it, that it's empathy. That it's not even loyalty or trust or honesty. We can kind of live without those things, though honesty is a a good one, especially if you have children. But we need empathy for other people. If we don't have empathy, and the world is so big, and we are connected in so many ways these days by our social media, and that we know what's going on in the big world. But at the same time, we can get stuck in our own little worlds and lose sight of having empathy for other people. And if we don't have empathy, we will never learn from our mistakes and be able to feel what other people are feeling. And where do we get that empathy? For me, it's reading. Reading is such a window into other people, but any way that we can educate ourselves to do that, whether it's reading or movies or history or going to talks, opening our minds to what other people are thinking and feeling. If I could ask people, when they read, to take one thing away from that, it would be that. It would be that we have empathy for others so that, this doesn't happen again. And a few other things people have asked me, some people, when they review it, they say, well, there's a lot of romance in this book. Well, I believe romance is always there in our lives and is an extremely important part of our life, or relationships, and not just the romance between men and women. To me, and I really think that I've addressed that in here, and I hope people see it, relationships between best friends. I think especially as women, I've had the best friend since I was 16, and truly this could be our story. Luckily it's not, but it could be. And I just, that having best friends through all our lives makes everything easier. We can laugh at the end of the day. I had some things happen today, and then, my best friend from 16 calls me, and we laugh about it, and it's easier. The things these girls hid on a farm in Austria for a year because they escaped on the train from the train that was going to Auschwitz. And they survived, and, it was not... The other thing about war, and this is one of the things that my mother made me see, is that war is also very interesting in that it makes your world so small, it's just about survival, that can actually be a good thing. And not all of her memories were bad, because, it's just like when we all have small children, right? And the greatest part of the day is you got them in the bath, and you have achieved something, and that's wonderful. Well, for them, just staying warm or just having food was wonderful. And so it's just very interesting that, when you can do that with a best friend, it makes it more manageable. And then the other relationship, romance relationship, is between mothers and daughters, for me at least. I have sons too, but, parents and children. It is such an important relationship that we have in our lives, and the bond here, the mother-daughter bond, is so strong. And I won't give things away, so I won't talk about too much, but what my grandmother felt for my mother and what my mother felt for my grandmother is just, sort of remarkable and yet universal. None of us would be here if our parents didn't feel that way. And I think that's just a very important thing. When they say that family is the most important thing in life, it truly is the truth. And I think that's how many of the survivors survived. If they're not surviving for themselves, they're surviving for their family. I have to keep going for my children or for my parents. I have to push them. Someone has to survive. There was, the death march towards the end of the war, when they were liberating the Russians came to liberate the camps, and the Germans didn't want that to happen, so they pushed the Jews out again and made them march 30 miles in the snow to the next camp, and many of the Jews died but they would push each other along, mother, child, and so, or friends, and that is how you survived. And then the other thing that I hope, and I'll stop, people take away is hope. There is always hope and beauty. I've always been a big believer in beauty making life better. And I don't mean, physical beauty. This is pretty much the only time I wear clothes. Generally, I'm in my pajamas. I mean finding beauty in anything. And I think finding beauty in things, for me, beauty is my cup of coffee at the end of the day. Because I don't let myself, enjoy myself during the day because I write. And so at 6 o'clock, I sit down with a cup of coffee and a book, not mine. And I just have the beauty of that cup of coffee. And so if we can find beauty in day-to-day things, and of course we know we're so lucky because we walk out the door and it's beautiful. And I really appreciate that. That's why one of the reasons I moved here is for the beauty. And I think that the girls find a lot of beauty in Naples, in the food. Finally there's food. And then in Venezuela, which, is a fascinating country. And then my mother, ends up in Sydney. And so if we can find just the joy in the little things in life and the beauty of that, then I think it's just easier to live and, an enriched life and be grateful. So I am grateful for everyone being here. And I'm more than happy to answer all questions. Thank you. Yes.
You mentioned that growing up, your mother started telling you all the stories, and some survivors don't talk about it at all. Some talk about it endlessly. Was there a moment in that precipitated the talk? I mean, my mother's a survivor, and precipitated was when I asked what the number was, and she said, it's a phone number of my friend. I said, you can't remember that? And that started her telling me a story, which is pretty late,
It's a great question, and you're so right. My mother was more of the afraid. I think you either first of all, you were Jewish without ever having to go to temple, right? Because we used to go to temple just twice a year, and yet we were actually conservative. But they were so much part of the experience that they didn't need that. And many of them were very afraid to talk about it at all. And so, yes, my mother was part of that group. I think it's almost like she used up all her courage. And then as she got older, the courage went away. And so she didn't talk about it. And I actually would overhear, I know a little Yiddish. I learned a little Hungarian just by hearing it. And I would hear these stories sort of in Hungarian, and then they would come to mind. And just like you, we had this thing, and I won't give it away, but again, you can message me, where somebody used to kiss her every night on her neck. And I would ask why. And that was when I was 11 or 12. And I won't give away anything else, but that was, it precipitated hearing the stories. Because, many of them didn't want to talk about it at all. It was just too fresh and too frightening. Yes.
Anita, I'm a little curious about, you stated that initially you'd written all your novels as Anita Hughes, and this one is Anita Abriel. And obviously I know this book is a special book for you, so I'm assuming that is your
maiden name. Yes. Though it's a made-up name that I didn't make it up. My mother was Vera Frankel, and then everyone often changed their names when they ended up somewhere because they didn't want those Jewish names to begin with. And when I wrote this, I wanted to feel closer to my mother, And I just thought it was a really wonderful way to do it is to use my maiden name. But I was saying to Terry that it's new for me too, because I was always next to Victor Hugo at the bookstore at Barnes and Noble. And now, I went and saw the book there, and it's all the way to the side. And so I'm hoping that people, don't just go straight through and look in the middle and skip over it.
Now, I have not read the book yet, but I will. Did you go to the places that are in the book that you talk about?
I've been to some of them, yes. I actually was in Budapest. Another thing about Holocaust survivors is they all wanted to go back. And so back in the 70s, mid-70s, we did go, and it was just after it wasn't communist anymore. And it was very grim at the time. Now my children have been, or a couple of my children, and say that Budapest is, amazing. And I've been to Naples and most of the places, not recently.
Did you go to Auschwitz?
No, I didn't. I wish I didn't think of it then.
It is a very interesting experience.
Oh, I can imagine.
It might behoove you to go
Yeah.
now that you've written the book.
Oh, I can only imagine. I would love to. Yes.
Can you tell me your favorite authors who you like
Yes.
to read?
All day, right? Gosh, so many. One that I always say, how come I didn't study him in college? And all you need to learn about life is Somerset Maugham. I don't know if anybody's read him, but just the most brilliant author. I love Penny Vincenzi, a British author, she just knows everything about life. I just love, and I was very pleased that at my last signing somebody said, I just finished Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, but I enjoyed your book better. And I was like, oh my goodness, because I used to love Thomas Hardy. So I kind of read everything. I'll read everything that's out now. I go to the library actually almost every day in my library in Dana Point. So I love everything, but mainly fiction, and but those are kind of my favorites. Yes.
Unless it's in the book, but how did she get off the train, and how many of her relatives did not?
I'll say how she got off the train. Her mother pushed her, and her friend. They had a plan to escape, and train is a very nice word. It was a cattle car with no windows and no food, no water. I mean, just surviving the train was an accomplishment. But yeah, they pushed her, and that was it. Then they're in the middle of a field in Austria. Yes.
What happened to the relationship with the girls? So your mother ended up in Australia. What happened with your best friend?
Oh, I won't say exactly what happened, but I did get to meet her. So they remained friends their whole lives, actually, and it's pretty wonderful. Yes.
I haven't read your book yet, but I have a feeling that there's a lot in there. I think it feels like a theme underneath of moral and physical courage. And have you thought about that? And if so, how have you addressed that in the book, or how have you thought about it with your, the characters in the book, with your family?
That's a great question. I think moral courage is a beautiful way of putting it, and that is, the courage that we all really need. I mean, other kinds of courage, you can rise above it, or you can, like, I'm not very good at flying, but you just do it to get somewhere. But moral courage is something you need every day. And so it's harder to find in yourself, but you truly need that to survive and be a good person. And I think that they found it, again, because there wasn't an option. You know, if you didn't have it, you would die, because there was nobody holding you up, and they were quite happy to put you down. And I think that is what humans, you know, we are better than we think, and more resilient than we think. We just have to find it in ourselves. Yes.
So thank you. Thank you for writing the book. Look forward to reading it.
Thank
as
you.
like probably everybody in the room. So without giving any clues, could you tell us what the illustration on the front cover might be?
Yes. Which I think they did a great job, my publisher. These are the two girls in Naples, you know, right after the war. And to me, that's, you know, that's the light and the beauty. You know, there is beauty there, and there is light after the war. There is hope. And I think that's how they picked it, is just to show that there's hope afterwards. Yes, yeah. Certainly not the blonde, right? Because where would this come from? Yes, yeah. And because she's too tall, so.
Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, Anita, thank you so much for being here, sharing your story.